Hi there! Hello class! This is Teacher Eleanor for your science lesson. Before we will start with our lesson, let us pause for a while first and feel the presence of the Lord. Almighty Father, we praise and thank you for this day. Watch over us as we go about our work and studies. Help us in every way so that we may become the children you want us to be. Amen. Hello children, this is Teacher Eleanor again for your science lesson. For our topic this week, we will be studying about interactions among living things and non-living things in estuaries and intertidal zones. This learning activity sheet was designed and written with you in mind. It is here to help you and discuss the interactions among living things and non-living things in estuaries and intertidal zones. The scope of this learner's activity sheet allows you to use it in many different learning situations. The language used recognizes the diverse vocabulary level of students. The lessons are arranged to follow the standard sequence of the course, but the order in which you read them can be changed to correspond with the textbook you are now using. This learner's activity sheet consists of the lessons on interactions among living things and non-living things in estuaries and intertidal zones. So after going this activity, you are expected to, number 1, describe an estuarine ecosystem and intertidal zones. Identify the biotic or the living things and the abiotic factors or non-living things in an estuary and intertidal zones. And finally, discuss the relationships of the biotic and abiotic factors in an estuary and intertidal zones. So, before we will start with our main lesson, let us try to check on this first. You may now get your answer sheets, get ready with them together with your ball pen because we will now be answering your pretest. Okay? Thank you. Now, let me read the direction first. Read each item comprehensively. Choose and write the letter of the best answer on the answer sheet provided. So, are you ready? Let me read the questions to you twice. Then you are going to read silently the choices. Then after reading the choices, you may now write the letter of your choice. Okay? Let's get started. Number 1. Which best describes the nursery of the seas? Nursery of the seas. Again, which best describes the nurseries of the seas? A, B, C, and D. Number 2. Which of the following are biotic factors in the estuary or the living things in the estuary? A, B, C, and D. Now let's go to number 3. Which of the following groups are abiotic factors in an estuary? The abiotic factors are the non-living things in an estuary. You have A, then B, C, and D. Number 4. How do abiotic and biotic factors interact with each other in an estuarine ecosystem? How do abiotic and biotic factors, the living and the non-living things, interact with each other in an ecosystem? Try to read the choices properly. Let's proceed to number 5. Number 5. Why is estuary important to living and non-living things? Why is estuary important to living and non-living things? Please read properly the choices so that you can choose the correct answer, class. Okay, number 6. Which do you call an area along a coastline that is underwater at high tide and above the water at low tide? Again, which do you call an area along a coastline that is underwater at high tide and above the water at low tide? Number 7. In which intertidal zone do purple shoreline crab, barnacles, and blue-green seaweed live? In which intertidal zone do purple shoreline crab, barnacles, and blue-green seaweed live? The number 8. Which of the following biotic factors are present during the low intertidal zone? Which of the following biotic factors are present during the low intertidal zone? Number 9. Which of the following best describes the spray zone? Which of the following best describes the spray zone? I know you find this very hard, but don't you worry, class, because you can still repeat answering this one after our lesson. I'm sure you will learn more of this. And number 10, intertidal zone is important to living and non-living things, except one. Which one is not? Asa man nga na ang dili? Okay, so since you are through with answering the pre-test, again, let me repeat this. You may still go back again or replay this again so that you can write the correct answer. If you think your answer is wrong, you may change. Okay, let's now proceed to our main lesson. This is all about interactions among living things and non-living things in estuaries and intertidal zones. Okay, let me read the lesson overview first. The Philippines is an archipelago, or being an archipelago, this is surrounded by seas and oceans. Philippines is rich in coastal areas which are affected by the rising and receding tides sa pagtaob o paghuna sa atong mga karagatan. These areas which are constantly exposed to the changing tides are called intertidal zones, or commonly known as seashore and or foreshore, or sometimes referred to as littoral zone. In our dialect or in Bisaya, it is called daplin sa dagat. The intertidal zone is the area along a coastline that is between the high tide mark and the low tide mark. Intertidal zones are homes to many kinds of marine animals and birds. Whether it is a rocky coast, a sandy beach, or a salt marsh, life in the intertidal zone needs to survive extreme conditions, both above and below the water. When the tide is low and then intertidal zone is above water, the things that live there can be exposed to warmer temperature and brighter light that they were below the water. So, intertidal zone is not new to us because most of you are living in the intertidal zone since Kanajing is an area or is a community nga naa-daplin sa dagat. So, the animals daplin sa dagat or in the intertidal zone nga nasa ato is very or are very familiar to us. Estuaries are areas of water and their surrounding coastal habitats, typically found where river meets the sea. Estuaries are often called nurseries of the seas because numerous animal species rely for nesting and breeding. They have dynamic environments where there are variations in water chemistry, including water salinity, as well as physical changes like the rise and fall of tides. Thus, organisms living must be adaptive. So by looking at the illustration, you can see nga na ay daghan mga sapa-sapa. And we know that the water in the river is not salty, tubig tabang. And then, sa unahan, mo na ang dagat. So, when the river and the sea meets each other, this is now what we call as estuary. Don't you know, class, that in an estuary, there are many fishes that grow there. There are many marine animals that serve as food. No? May ato ka ng kuhaan sa atong pagkaon. Okay, that is because it is affected by the water salinity, the physical changes like the rise and fall of tides, ang pagtaob o ang paghunas sa dagat. Thus, organisms living there must be adaptive. Now, in the estuary and intertidal zone, there are biotic factors and the abiotic factors. Abiotic factors, these are the non-living things. So what are they? So table 1 give us the abiotic factors and their effects to estuaries. So you have number 1 is amount of sunlight. How will you describe amount of sunlight? So sunlight or solar radiation that is visible at the Earth's surface. This is not new to us, kaya permita mainitan. So what is the effect of the amount of sunlight to the estuary? Now, this is used for photosynthetic organisms. Like for example, the phytoplanktons, the seaweeds, and the seagrass in making their food. Diba? We learned from our previous lessons that plants can manufacture their food with the help of sunlight. And seagrass, seaweeds, they are plants. Now, crucial to produce oxygen for living things in the estuaries. Less sunlight in an estuary, less photosynthetic organisms that can support other organisms. That is why, as you notice, class, sa dagat, ang mga seaweeds na adool sa daplin. Because the water or the amount of sunlight can penetrate. Makaabot pa man nila ngadto. Pero ngadto na sa laom, wala na'y mga seaweeds kaayo. Amount of light in many estuaries, they are very shallow with very little plant coverage. So plenty of sunlight reaches the bottom to power photosynthesis. Most reach a depth of less than 20 meters. So more than 20 meters na galing, the sunlight cannot penetrate in there already. Ngit-ngit na din nakagakuan. Wala na yung mga plants. Aside from the amount of sunlight, we also have salinity of water. What do you mean by salinity of water? Now, this is the saltiness or dissolved salt content of a body of water. Salinity of estuaries is lower than that of the sea and ocean. Sa may sabot ani niya. Diba I told you a while ago that the river meets the seas in estuary. No. And you know that the water in the river is tubig tabang. Tabang man siya, tabang. And then, sa sea, salty. But, kung mag-meet galing sila, ang kaparat sa sea, maiban-ibanan, kay naa may nagsagol nga tubig tabang or tabang. So, lower ang salinity, ang saltiness, or dissolved salt in the estuary is lower than that of the sea, mas parat ang sa dagat, how much more ang sa ocean. So, some organisms prefer to breed in places with low salinity. Daghay mga organism nga to sila mo itlog, mo daghan sa mga parts sa dagat nga dili kaayo parat. Okay, next we have temperature of water. The hotness or the coldness of water. Ang kainiton or ang kabugnawon sa water. Now, temperature of the water must not be too hot or cold for young organisms to live. Sakto-sakto ra. Dili kay siya init, dili sa siya kaayo bugnaw. This is affected by tides and presence of mangroves in the area. That is why mangroves are very helpful to fishes. We also have the types of soil. Okay, not all shores or not all kandaplin sa dagat pareho. Dili sila tanan pareho. This is a distinct characteristics that provide growing benefits and limitation. Type of soil is determined by the kinds of rock present in the area. Now, the kind of living things that live in the area depends on the type of soil due to the nutrients it contains. Some types of soil are rocks, sand, pebbles, or clay. No, naay sandy nga shore, naasay rocky shore, naasay shore nga combi, naay sand, naay rocks, naasay clay or clay. And we also have waves. No, try to look at waves. Ang bawd sa dagat. This is a ridge or swell on the surface of a body of water rushing to the shore. This is affected the type of organisms living in the estuary. Some organisms like mussels and seaweeds attach themselves to rocks. No, mupilit na sila sa rocks so that they will not be carried by the waves. So, kung matangtanggaling sila sa rocks or sa mga anything ila kuanan nga sa daplin sa dagat na matangtanggaling sila, there's a tendency nga mamatay sila kay madadaman sila sa waves ng banding-banding. Okay, so we are finished with the abiotic factors in the estuary. Now, we also have the biotic factors, the living organisms. So, kung naay non-living organisms in the estuary, there is also what we call as the biotic factors or the living things. And of course, their homes. So, habitat. Sa mga habitats, we have number 1, coral reefs. How do you describe coral reefs? Okay, teeming with many corals. Of course, being ito coral reefs, this is a place where there are plenty of corals. Coral reef formations are in this area due to a large number of corals living, and this serves as sanctuary for young fishes. Sanctuary sa puloy-anan, habitat for young fishes ka ng mga bagong gianak, mga fingerlings. What are the aquatic organisms living in the coral reefs? course, na ay corals, different kinds of fishes, no, lain-lain nga color. Okay, many types of jellyfishes, sea anemones, and sea stars. Aside from that, we also have mud flats, also known as tidal flats. So this is a large amount of mud, lapok, deposited on it. Usually comes from the sea and river. So diri sa Ormoc, I can say nga na ay mud flats nga to dapita sa naungan kay naa man nga tay daghang mangroves. Now, what are the animals or the living organisms nga ato makita sa mud flats? We have clams, bivalve, pwedeng univalve, crabs, migratory birds, mussels, mollusks, sand dollars, and shellfish. Okay na, makita ninyo sa illustration. Example na sa mga sand flats. Mud flats. Next, we have mangrove forest. Protect the coast against erosion caused by waves, winds, and tides. So if a certain community is covered with mangroves, less ang ilang chance nga magka-soil erosion. Kaya naamay mo protect nila against the big waves, the winds, and the tides. Protect coral reefs and seagrass beds from silting or deposition of sand. Nga dili ba makaveran dayon og sand or mga muds. And breeding grounds na siya for different kinds of fish and shellfish. Meaning to say, in this area, in mangrove forest, many fishes will thrive there to lay their eggs. Not to lay their eggs because it serves as breeding grounds. Not just only fish, but also shellfish. So what are the organisms found in this area? So we have algae, barnacles, shrimps, oysters, lobsters, crabs, different kinds of fish, and shellfish. And then we also have rocky shores. Okay, ang dalampasigan natin, daplin sa dagat is full of rocks. Shores which have many rocks deposited. Rocks serve as the hiding places for the small crabs. So kanang mga small crabs nga na mutago sa mga bato-bato. Okay, so like the purple crab, barnacles, hermit crabs, the limpets, the mollusk, the prawn, and then sea stars and shrimps. Try to look at sa mga illustration mo ni some of the examples nga makita nato sa rocky shores. And finally, we have salt marshes. Area filled with seawater during high tide and becomes drained when it is low tide. So, sa ino kayo ni siya sa buto, no? Nga kini nga area ang salt marshes, there is water during high tide, but during low tide, wala. No? Marshy due of the decomposing plant matter in the area. So what are the animals that can be found in salt marshes? We also have clams, mussels, oysters, shrimps, and of course, snails. Okay, so this letter C is about shore zonation. Okay, ang sa dagat gikan sa splash zone to high tide zone to mid tide zone to low tide zone. Na may upat ka zones. So, low tide, the mid tide, the high tide, and the splash zones. Intertidal zone is the area where the ocean meets the land between high and low tides. It exists anywhere the ocean meets the land, from steep, rocky ledges to long, sloping sandy beaches and mud flats that can extend for hundreds of meters. Marine biologists divide the intertidal region in 4 distinct physical subdivisions based on the amount of exposure each gets. These are the spray zone, the high or upper intertidal zone, the middle intertidal zone, and the lower intertidal zone. Ako gipakita before, diba? Okay, try to look at the illustration properly. So, muna siya, gidivide na siya by zones. So, ang pinakaibabaw, the spray zone, next followed by high tide zone, and then mid tide zone, ang ikaupat, the low tide zone. So, ang spray zone, mabasa lang na siya gunay kanang kusog kay nga tapsik ba sa dagat, kanang sa waves, o dili, pila lang ka percent sa kuha nga mabasa na siya. So, what are the animals or the organisms that can be found here? So, we have rocklose, the periwinkle, and the limpet. Magtikalayo o magtikausog na ito sa ubos, nganto sa may water na the high tide zone. So kung mag high tide, mabasa ni siya nga area. So nasa mga organism nga naa diri. Like for example, the buckshot barnacle, the periwinkle, the limpets. Muna sa high tide zone. Then down, nagtikaubos na, nagtikalayo na ta, the mid tide zone. So, sa may mga animals that can be found here. Mussels, the sea lettuce, the chitons and limpets, the hermit crabs. And then, ang pinakaubos, the low tide zone, nga makita nato siya during low tide. Pero nagyapon siya tubig. Na during low tide, makita na nato kay mabaw na kay siya. But still submerged ni nga mga animals or organisms sa water. Like for example, the algae, the sea urchins, then the brittle star, the sea slug, the sponges, the sea anemone, and others. Okay, spray zone. This is, how are we going to describe the spray zone? More a part of the land than the ocean. So, matagin ko ganiha, mabasa man lang ng spray zone kung kusog ang kuan sa dagat, no? Tampisik sa dagat. So, more part of the land na gina siya than the ocean. Rarely submerged. Talagsara kay mag-submerge. Tingali kung naibagyo, mananara. Very high tide or severe storms. Mabasa lang kung naigrabe kaayo kataas ang tubig, high tide, or kung naibagyo wherein kusog kaayo ang bow. What are the marine organisms that can be found here? We have lichen, the periwinkle, the snails, diba? Nakita niyo sa illustration nga gikita, nga gipakita. Next, the high or the upper intertidal zone, ang sa ibabaw. They are just flooded during the peak season, once or twice daily high tides. Mabasa sila kung motaob. Kung dili motaob, kasi sila mabasa. Out of the water for long stretches in between. So what are the organisms that are found here? We have the purple shoreline crab, the barnacles, the blue-green seaweeds. Okay. The middle intertidal zone generally submerged except for a fairly short period during the turn of the low tide. So, ang middle intertidal, submerged yun na siya perme. Na sometimes in a part niya nga, dili na siya masubmerge kaya nag-very low tide. Pero mostly, generally, submerged in water yun na. So, we have mussel bed, sea urchins, snails, the sea stars, and the sea anemones. Try to look at some examples there. the gooseneck barnacles, California mussels, the black leader chitons, the anemones, the ochre sea star, and the sea palms. Then we have the lower intertidal zone, exposed during the lowest spring tides. Lowest spring tides. So what are the organisms that are found here? We have anemones, the red algae, the Dungeness crab, sea stars, sea urchins, and kelp. Black chiton, tube worm, opalescent, sea slug, then orange sea cucumber, and native eelgrass. Okay, so since we are through with the biotic and abiotic factors in the ecosystem and intertidal zone, we have to answer now some of the guide questions. So this is what we are going to do. You're going to differentiate a estuary from an intertidal zone. Can you still remember? Okay, correct. Oh, you got a point there. So when you say estuary, a river meets the sea. So ang salinity sa estuary is different with the other parts kay nag-ipon man ang tubig tabang o tubig alat. Intertidal zone, this is the part of the sea na mabasa during high tide and low tide. Daplin sa dagat. Okay, you may pause for a while, then you replay so that you can get the correct answer. For number 2, what are the living organisms and non-living organisms that usually found in an estuary and intertidal zones? So I've got there lots of examples. You may copy there the living things or the biotic factors in estuaries and intertidal zones, and the non-living organisms in both estuaries and intertidal zones. And for number 3, you are going to answer this one. How living and non-living organisms interact in estuaries and intertidal zones. Giyon sa kuno nila pag-interact. Okay. Again, pwede i-pause, pwede i-replay so that you can write the correct answer. Don't you worry about it. Okay, I practice this. In a provided or separate sheet of paper or answer sheet, since I provided you with it, draw at least 2 examples of biotic factors in corresponding habitat where they are adapted. So mag-draw mo og duha lang. Kada environment nga ko'y hatag. Okay, you're going to draw biotic factors for coral reefs, duha ka buok. Kasi, can you still remember? Oh, the fishes. Naghan pa. Okay, and then we also have mangrove forest. Oh, kadaghan adto, like the birds, the fishes, the mussels, and lots of other organisms. Pwede rin ninyo tanawon again. Then you have mud flats, another 2 examples, i-draw. And then rocky shore, another 2 example, inyo gyapon i-draw. And finally, ay kalima, salt marshes, duha ka example, for a total of 10 drawings, 10 organisms. I learned this. Write true if the statement is correct and false if it is otherwise, meaning if it is not true. Okay? Very easy. Okay, let's start now. Aquatic animals like small crabs and shrimps will lose their source of food if mangrove trees have been cut or destroyed. Again, aquatic animals like small crabs and shrimps will lose their source of food if mangrove trees have been cut or destroyed. True or false? Number 2, Too much exposure to sunlight of aquatic animals during lowest tide may lead them to desiccate or dry up. Mauga sila, mauga. No, maughan. Too much exposure to sunlight of aquatic animals during lowest tide may lead them to desiccate or dry up. True or false? Marine plants and animals need enough temperature in order to survive in an environment. Number 3, marine plants and animals need enough temperature in order to survive in an environment. True or false? Number 4, people living near the river banks should dispose their waste in the water. People living near the river banks, ang ilang mga waste, ilalang ilabay nga to kuno sa water. True or false? And number 5, improper disposal of garbage by the residents who are living near the river banks may lead to destroy aquatic plants and animals and even the mangrove trees. Improper disposal of garbage meaning pataka lang sila labay sa ilang garbage. Kanang mga tao nga nagpuyo daplin sa sapa. No? It may lead to destroy aquatic plants, madaot ang mga aquatic plants, mga aquatic animals, and even the mangrove trees. True or false? Next, we have I test myself. Okay, I will read again the question for you. This time, I will no longer read the choices. You will be the one to read it silently for you and choose the letter. Write it on your answer sheet. Is it understood? Okay, number 1. Okay, which do you call a relationship between biotic and abiotic factors in certain place? Which do you call a relationship between biotic and abiotic factors in certain place? Number 2. The following best describes the estuaries or estuarine ecosystem. Which one is not? Ang wala nag-describe, mainyo pangitaon. The following best describes the estuaries or estuarine ecosystem. Which one is not? Again, pwede ra i-pause kadiyot so that you can read and choose. Number 3. Which of the following factors are biotic in an estuarine ecosystem? Biotic meaning living things. Letter, no, I will not read it anymore. A, B, C, or D. Apit na kon si ma'am. Natalay. Number 4. These groups belong to abiotic factors. Which group does not belong to the abiotic factors? Ang wala na belong sa abiotic factors. A, B, C, or D. Number 5. Why do you think the interaction between living and non-living things important in an estuarine ecosystem? Why do you think that the interaction between living and non-living things important in an estuarine ecosystem? Okay, pili pag maayo. Ayuha pagbasa. Number 6. If it is the area along a coastline that is underwater at high tide, mabasa lang ko na siya kung high tide, and above the water at low tide. Area along a coastline that is underwater at high tide and above the water at low tide. Very easy. Number 7. The following are the abiotic factors in the intertidal zone except one. Which one is that? Number 8. Larger plants such as mangroves help moderate the extreme temperature in the intertidal zone. Mangroves are examples of blank factors. We are almost done. Let's go to number 9. This caused some animals like limpets to be threatened to live in a rocky shore. This caused some animals like limpets to be threatened to live in a rocky shore. And number 10, mussel bed, sea urchins, snails, sea stars, and anemones can be seen in this zone because it is generally submerged, except for a fairly short period during the turn of low tide. Let me repeat it. Mussel bed, sea urchins, snails, sea stars, and anemones can be seen in this zone. Makita lang ko na sila because it is generally submerged except for a fairly short period during the turn of low tide. Which zone is this? Okay, since you are true, di man na gyud ang I test myself. Pero napailain ha. Reflection, you're going to write this one. What is your idea with this? Why is estuaries and intertidal zone important to both biotic and abiotic, to living and non-living things? Nganing importante man ko no ang estuaries o ang intertidal zone. Okay, you write that on your reflection area. Okay, now nasa ko gipada nga inyong inyong trabahoonon. You have their template number 1 about estuaries and template number 2 about intertidal zone. Okay, don't you worry, kay naagyapon na sa inyong activity or answer sheets. Using a pair of scissors, cut the materials kit from template 2. Natagaan mo niya anak, matagaan ra mo. Paste them in their proper place in your body. So, asa ko nato ibutang na mangan, pita. So, inyo siya i-draw, inyo siya i-cut, then i-paste ninyo sa sud. Okay? For template number 2, environment and me. Basa na siya. Okay, using a pair of scissors, cut the materials kit from template number 4. Paste them in their proper place, the intertidal zones. Okay, template number 4, intertidal zone material kit. Mo na inyong guntingon para dito. Sa template number 3. And so, since I am through with you're going to pass the templates together with your answer sheets. And don't forget to answer the post test because this is very important. This can tell whether you actually learn from our lesson or not. Okay, read the questions and select the letter of your best answer. You have number 1 and number 2. Then you have number 3 and number 4. Pwede ra i-pause ha, kadiyot. Number 5 and number 6. number 7, and number 8. Number 9 and number 10. Okay, done? Very good. Again, don't you worry because you can still review this to check whether your answer is correct or not. So, since we are through, we are done, we are finished, let us have a closing prayer first. No, mag-closing prayer, Aneta. Okay, close your eyes and feel the presence of the Lord as we say, Dear God, thank you for the lesson today. It's great to find out new things about your world. It's fun trying new skills and learning to read and write. Help us remember all we have learned today in class. We look forward to tomorrow and all the wonderful things we will be taught. Amen. Okay, since everything is done, we are through, we are finished. This has been Teacher Eleanor saying thank you for listening to my video lesson. I hope you learned something from me. Let me say bye-bye and see you again next week. Mwah!